Hello viewers, and a very warm welcome to the 2020 French Chamber's Business Day. Or a warm welcome back, in fact, if you've already been enjoying our smorgasbord of sessions during this very special week. My name is Alison Woolsey, and I am currently a counsellor with the New South Wales chapter of FACHI, the French Chamber, and previously one of its federal board directors. I am also the director of Clayton Utz, director of diversity and inclusion at Clayton Utz, a leading Australian law firm. Now, before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which each of us are meeting today. Now, in my case, here in Sydney, it is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, both past and present. Now, shaping attractive cities is our theme for the week, and I'm so fortunate to be joined today by a marvellous panel who are going to do this topic justice. But we're going to focus in particular on diversity and inclusion, which arguably underpin an attractive city, if not even define the term. So what I'm going to do to kick off is I'm going to ask each panellist to give a very brief introduction to themselves and an overarching comment perhaps about the importance of diversity and inclusion for them, either personally or in their role. So we might just start with the person at the top left of my screen, which is Miriam. Over to you, Miriam.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Myriam Boisbouvier-Wiley. Je suis la consul honoraire de France dans Victoria, so I'm the honorary consul of France in Melbourne and Victoria. I am also a judge on the panel of the City of Melbourne annual Melbourne Awards. The Melbourne Awards are the City of Melbourne highest accolade, celebrating the inspirational Melburnians who dedicate their time and energy to make their city better. This year, there was a special category of the community champions for the unsung heroes who helped out fellow Melburnians during the 2 waves of the pandemic. I got to be a judge on this panel because in 2017, the Bastille Day French Festival, which is an event that I created in 2014, won the Melbourne Award in the category Contribution to Multiculturalism. The festival is a federation of all the Francophile and Francophone community of Melbourne around the celebration of the French National Day. Prior to being appointed Consul of France almost 10 years ago, I was the president of the French school in Melbourne, the primary section based in Caulfield, which at the time was in a very fragile situation. It was threatened to be closed by the Victorian Department of Education, and it was not recognized by the French national education system. Therefore, I had to play an active role in lobbying and advocacy to get dual recognition for this program, which is now thriving, fully integrated in the Victorian system and fully acknowledged by the French Ministry of Education. 2 memorandum of understandings have been signed since then with the French Republic and Victorian government to ensure that this program would prosper. So I made a long story to tell you why I think that diversity and inclusion are important to me. They are of paramount importance, not simply as ethereal or philosophical concepts, but as real projects, federating real people around common goals.
Thank you, Miriam. And a warm welcome to you too, Jun. I'll hand over to you.
Well, thank you. It's a privilege to be part of this panel. I guess I'm based in Singapore, so clearly geographically diverse from the rest of our panelists. So currently, I'm helming or leading the function of talent and learning for Schneider Electric. And basically, my responsibility covers the international arena of our business, which is across 5 different zones in South America, Pacific, East Asia, Japan, India, as well as Middle East and Africa. So just from a geographical scope standpoint, clearly they're very diverse. It's a mix of nationalities, economic types, mature, emerging economies, and, from a just pure diversity is huge. So why is D&I important to me? I think that it's very core to our value as an organization. So embrace different is a core value of Schneider Electric. And I personally believe in that because in my role as a talent and learning leader, you draw out the best when you embrace difference, right? In terms of ideas, in terms of gender, in terms of background, in terms of beliefs. So, and I've seen that at work. So I count it a real privilege to be leading this function at this point in time as the world goes through significant challenges and transition. So thank you for this opportunity to be part of the team and sharing our thoughts with you.
Thank you, Jun, and really delighted that you could join us from Singapore and of course from one of our key sponsors, Schneider Electric, so thank you. And a little bit closer to home, we have Emily. Over to you, Emily.
Hi everyone, thank you Alison and thank you for having me. So I'm Emily, I'm the founder and director of We Inclusive, an innovation and inclusion consultancy based in Melbourne. A little bit about diversity and inclusion and why it's important to me. I grew up in a small town in the northeast of France called Verdun. So a part of France that people who are only interested in World War I visit, actually, far from the French Riviera. I had a happy childhood that I always thought I could achieve anything. However, I remember very clearly that diversity was invisible to me. I don't think the word inclusion didn't even exist. So it's only many, many years later, and I want to tell you how many, that after having managed a team of 200 employees, 95% of them being male, I would say a low diverse industry, which is transport. After having led cross-cultural teams and coordinated organizational change in 5 different countries across Europe, and also introduce, hopefully, innovative strategies to remove barriers faced by people with disabilities, that I realized diversity matters so much to me that this was something I really wanted to offer to my kids. So with my husband, we made the bold move to move 16,000 kilometers from where we were both born, Australia. And actually, reflecting on this adjustment to my new country, yes, I was excited, but I also felt a sense of exclusion, and nothing in comparison with what people from other ethnicities or countries and even Aboriginal Australians may feel. But still, this feeling that for a short period of time, I didn't belong. And actually, Australia, I discovered very, very quickly that multiculturality is part of the fabric of this country and this city. And what was great is that living and working here has quickly made me feel that I could call Australia home while celebrating my French heritage. So this is not by accident that in 2018, I connected with my value and I set up my consultancy. So really passionate about employee engagement, customer trust, and performance through inclusion and innovation. So I do anything from helping talented yet not typical leaders who haven't had a linear career and who can't really see role models who look like them achieve what they want to achieve, and also helping teams increasing their cross-cultural intelligence.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you for sharing a little bit about your personal background. I think that adds a really nice piece to our discussion today, so welcome. And finally, a very warm welcome to Julien, who's joining us from Melbourne. Over to you, Julien.
Hi, Alison, and hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today. So as I said, I'm Julien de Renoir. I'm currently the Chief Executive Officer of Yaba Trams, the operator of the tram network in Melbourne. And I guess diversity and inclusion for me is important from many perspectives. But I'd say as an employer, for me, it's really important. Emily just before mentioned how transport is a typically very male industry. And so this is something we try as an employer trying to address and to increase diversity at all levels and all types of diversity in the business. But it's also not only important as an employer, but also, I'd say, as public transport operator. And this is one of the reasons really why I started working in this particular industry, because I think it's really about bringing people together and giving opportunities, increasing the number of opportunities that everyone can have by being able to move freely and to access every opportunities they can have. So this is really connected to my personal values and to the role I see in my professional life. So diversity and inclusion is really something that resonates very strongly with me.
Thank you, Julien. And once again, thank you for sharing some of your story. And I think we're going to explore some of those themes today. So looking forward to that. Emily, I'm going to start with you because I'd really like to go back to some basics. You and I in our diversity roles may think that we've moved way beyond having to establish what the business case is for diversity and inclusion, but it still remains a polarizing topic, it's fair to say. And sometimes it's actually quite helpful to restate the fundamentals, isn't it? So can you explain to us and our viewers why diversity and inclusion, in your view, is good for business, and why is it particularly relevant in the context of this week's discussion of being an attractive city?
Yeah, thank you, Alison. Actually, I did a bit of research about a year ago, and I surveyed chairs, CEOs, and employees from senior leaders to frontline employees, and working in small, medium, large organizations across the world. And I'm going to start with good news, is that 90% of the respondents said that diversity and inclusion is a priority in their organization, and almost 1 in 2 said it was in their top 5 priorities. And I'm always almost split when I'm asked the question about business case. And in the same study, I was really thrilled that only 5% of the respondents said that developing a business case is a solution to improve D&I. So hopefully, you and I think we're past this need for a business case. And all the panelists today have already framed the business case. We've heard about offering more equal opportunities, about really attracting and retaining talent, about employee feeling being heard and valued, which is really important, and also about performance. So when it comes to a city, which I think is really the good area to talk about diversity and inclusion, I think there are two things. The first one is really about the challenge of livability and density. And I think diversity and inclusion is very critical to managing this challenge. When I thought about Australia before moving to Australia, the way I picture Australia was not a country where 90% of the population live in 1% of the country, which is actually what's happening, being people living in, I don't know, 7 or 8 cities. And actually, if I can come back to the 80s, which is a bit a long time ago, but a really good foundation is Vienna. Vienna is you may know, the most livable city in the world now. Melbourne was, but is not anymore. And what happened in the 80s is that Vienna looked at urban development through a gender lens. And so they conducted 60 gender-sensitive pilots. And interestingly, almost amazingly, they discovered that women have different daily patterns, commute patterns from men. And so the outcome was, more space allocated to parks, for more intimate, I would say, relationship instead of playing soccer. It was more new street lighting. It was also more footpaths, etc. Just a nice example to say how diversity and inclusion is critical. And the other one is obviously from an economic and social perspective, which is really important. I told you that I came to Australia in August 2015. At that time, and I know it's very different now, and I think it's an upcoming challenge, 2,000 people did exactly the same thing. So yeah, definitely, you know, the attraction of talent from various countries is pivotal. What I say to my clients is also that it's an invisible market you haven't tapped into. 1 in 5 Australians lives with a disability. It's 5 million people. And they have needs that, you know, organization can definitely cover. So it was a long diversity and inclusion business case, which I hope everyone's convinced now about that.
Oh, thank you, Emily. And you've really, I think, shared some useful thoughts and helped lay the groundwork for the discussion today. And your reference to Vienna is an interesting one, because they have adopted this incredible gendered framework to everything they do, which is quite fascinating. But speaking about particular cities, Miriam, each city in Australia has its own tale to tell. But a big event in recent history in Australia, and we've been acknowledging it in particular in the last few months, given its 20th anniversary, was the Sydney Olympics. Now, Olympics, of course, are by their very nature, you know, symbols of diversity and inclusion. So in your view, were the Olympic Games back in 2000 a real turning point for the city of Sydney?
Thank you for this introduction. Yes, I think it was. I was fairly new in Australia at the time, and I had only been there for 3 years when I became the Olympic attaché. I was actually the Olympic attaché of Monaco in the Sydney Olympics, the Millennium Games. And I will start with a broader introduction, if I may, on the origins of the cities. Why do cities exist? And I think that they were initially created a long time ago in the ancient civilizations to be places of exchange and trade. And they were also common places of worship. So they were meant to be gathering people from different origins. Then with the industrialization world, we had the megalopolis and the cities starting losing their souls and creating all these divisions that Emily was referring to. And then with the digitalization, we have another concept of cities that maybe June will refer to later, with, you know, people starting companies from their kitchen, startups, and having shared working space that redesign the thinking about cities. And then we have the COVID, and that is creating another set of complete different criteria on which we have to focus on for the future. So what I am trying to say is that given the rich history of cities, what we can do about diversity is that we need to focus on all our common goals. What is the thing that is universal to all our human, that unite people? And there are things like education, health, and sport. And that makes my transition to Sydney Olympic, because obviously sport is a common denominator, and it was created, the Olympics, by Pierre de Coubertin, the French baron, who decided it could be what a wonderful way of participating, and the main thing was not to win but to participate. Of course, that's full of nobody believes that, everybody wants to win, but needless to say, the Monaco team with 4 athletes was not there to win. They were really there to participate. The preparation for the Sydney Olympics were magnificent. I was very impressed. I was part of SOCOG for the year before, so in 1999. And they were very busy organizing everything to a T. So the preparation and involvement in making this inclusion of all these people coming from different background and different culture was very impressive. They were looking very much at what had been done in Atlanta in 1996, which were the Olympic Games prior, and trying to avoid the mistakes And so that's where I pause here, where I give another tip, and I rejoin what Emily just said. It's important to learn from the past. It's important to learn from other experiences, to take the good and try to not redo the bad. In general, the Olympics should be a boost for the host city. Paris will be hosting the Games in 2024. Brisbane is trying to host the Games in 1932. I think these are times, Olympic times, for cities, for the host cities, to have a hard look at oneself. And because they are planning to be in the center of the world, they will have the shining spot on them for a while. And that's when you are making that bid, or when you have won the bid, you have to look at what do we want to show the world and what we want to do. And so it's time to see what can be improved and what, and certainly the multiculturalism aspect of a city was what Sydney was trying to showcase, and that's what they did. I think in the Millennium Games, what Sydney has given 3 lasting improvements. One is Homebush. It was a derelict site. It was an industrial site west of the city that was not really used. It has now given way to a solar-powered suburb. Its name is Sydney Olympic Park. It's the state-of-the-art sporting center where you have big sporting competitions all the time. I don't know if you saw the NRL Grand Final on Saturday, but that was played in Homebush Olympic Park. And by the way, this had been the case in Atlanta as well. They had redefined a derelict industrial park to be the home of Atlanta Games. I am less sure about the legacy of the Rio Olympic Games because the site was completely redefined but over swamps, and I'm not sure they did such a good job, but it doesn't matter. I think the impetus for the Olympic bid is to make the city better and to have a lasting impact for the benefit of the local population. What the second point of the Sydney Olympics was on Sydney-siders and on Australian as a general, was to make happy and proud people. It really brought in a more cohesive society. I think they are still beaming with pride about the Olympics, the Sydney-siders, and in general, the Australians. Everybody remembers where they were, that famous race when Cathy Freeman won it. I was there in the top shelf there, watching from a distance, but what a roar, it was amazing. And it was a giant experience with all the volunteers. The volunteers from different backgrounds, from all over the socio-economic background coming to help. They were the most friendly, happy, energetic, generous, and proud ambassadors for their cities. And I have been to other Olympic Games, and I must say the Sydney-siders volunteers, the Australian volunteers, were by far the best. And I'm not Sam Arrange saying they were the best. I'm really compare them to the Rio and Beijing Olympic volunteers. I think, and that's my personal view, not everybody will agree with that, but I also think that in that second legacy of the Olympics, that it paved the way for white Australians to say sorry to their Indigenous population. There were a lot of, it was perhaps the first time at the opening ceremony that the sorry word was written everywhere. It was a start, or maybe not the start, but the continuation of a conversation that is not finished today, but it was the first step to the movement to say at least sorry for the stolen generation, and there is still progress to be made. And so I'm planting the seed here. If Brisbane wins the 32 Olympics bids, I hope by then we will have seen the Uluru Statement for the Heart being endorsed and the Constitution changed to really embrace that Indigenous reconciliation step. But this is maybe ahead of myself. The third lasting legacy of the Sydney Olympics for me was transport. I was living in Bondi in 1999, and so it's quite a long way away from Homebush. But the train was magic. On time, fast, express lanes, cheap, everything you want from a railway transport. And all the Sydney-siders were able to go to Homebush without any problem. I also think, and I'm not sure whether it was done at the time of the Sydney Olympics, but that airport link that connects the airport to the center of the city is just amazing. To this day, as a Melbourneian, I'm very envious of this link. And I think that public transport means accessibility, and accessibility is crucial for inclusion. So this was my little link to Julien, but I don't know if you want to take over, Alison, again.
No, over to you, Julien. Transport.
Yes, sure. Thanks for, I think, Miriam, that was really very interesting and reflecting on what you're just saying about, the role of the major events and Olympics. I can just think of, what has been happening in London, for instance, or what will be happening in Paris with the next Olympics, and how it really accelerates key transport projects that are great for accessibility for everyone. We all know, how transport in Paris can be terrible in terms of accessibility. But this major project, this Olympics, will be an opportunity to open new metro lines that are actually accessible. And as we know, public transport can play a huge role in diversity and inclusion, and the way they are managed as well can make a fantastic difference. And maybe I can only share 3 examples, for instance, and 3 different perspectives. One, obviously, is the socio-economic perspective. Public transport is used mostly for people to commute and go to access their work. But what we know as well is that in peak hours, public transport are used mostly by, I'd say, more like wealthy people going to, at least here in Melbourne, it's very clear. Whereas in off-peak, when you travel, in the middle of the day or during the weekends, I mean, people are using public transport are not as wealthy. So the way you manage public transport, for instance, if you increase the level of service, outside of peak hours, for instance, that will make a huge difference in the kind of the type of people that will be able to travel. And so the decision you're making, for instance, just on the service, the type of service on public transport will make a huge difference. Are you accommodating only those people in suits going to the CBD in their office, or are you accommodating like more needs, older people or poorer people as well? And that makes a big difference. Another issue, obviously, is gender diversity, and the question of security is very important in public transport. And we've done a few inquiries, and for instance, we found out that in Melbourne, which is quite a safe city, but in Melbourne, more than 58% of the women we interrogated say that they don't feel safe traveling in the trams at night, for instance. So it is and would rather use another mode of transport. And that's obviously a huge issue for us, because if we want to, be really inclusive, it means we have to address this issue. We have to be, well, it's not normal. Public transport shouldn't be accessible only to males after at night. And so it means that there's a lot of effort that we can do. And obviously the last dimension for us is the accessibility, and Miriam, you just mentioned that before. As Emily said before, we have 1 in 5 person has an accessibility issue at the moment, and it's a huge challenge for public transport. If we just look at our trams in Melbourne, we have 1 in 3 of our trams are accessible. Only 1 in 4 of our platforms. And if we look at end-to-end trips, it's less than 1 in 6 of our trips that is accessible to everyone. It's a huge issue. We know it would cost more than $2 billion to fix that. So it will not be done in the short term. But even in the short term, there are things we can do, because accessibility is not only about being able to move around with a wheelchair. There's a lot of other issues like auditive disabilities, cognitive issues as well. And we have to be active in this space. How do we communicate with everyone? How we can implement, and train our frontline staff also to be able to accommodate these people? All this, I mean, that has a big impact. Now, I think being here in Australia and having been working in France as well, I know that the approach to this is very different. And for instance, here in Australia, we are required to improve our network, to make sure that by 2032, all our network is compliant and fully accessible, which, as I said, will require a lot of money. And in the meantime, well, public transport is not fully accessible. So, but then when it is done, then we will have a super inclusive solution, but that will take time. France has chosen a very different approach where there's no requirement that all public transport are accessible. There is a requirement that everyone has an option to travel. So it means, for instance, everyone knows that like the metro system in Paris everyone has there is an understanding that it will never be fully accessible because it was designed 100 years ago with stairs very deep underground, and that providing elevators and will never happen. So there is this idea that the metro in Paris will never be inclusive. Yet a solution will have to be provided to everyone. So if you are traveling with a wheelchair in Paris, there are options now. So the public transport authority is providing like basically dedicated cars to move everyone around. So it's absolutely not an inclusive solution, because either you are able to travel and then you can take public transport, or you are not, and then government will provide you a solution. So it's not inclusive, yet everyone has a solution. So it's two different approach to the same question and two different answers to the same problem. I find it really interesting to compare them. So yes, as I said, transport obviously can play a huge role in diversity and inclusion. And so that's why it's so exciting to be in this industry, I'd say.
Thanks, Julien. There's some really interesting points you're making there. And maybe we can explore a bit further that dichotomy, I guess, of Paris versus Melbourne or Australia. And Emily, I know you've got some thoughts on this role of a far more human-centered design in designing our cities. Is that something you could fill us in a bit on?
Yeah, of course. I think it's really important to mention human-centered design, because Julien has already touched base on that. But when we look at making transport accessible, for example, if I invite you to picture a passenger with a disability using public transport in Melbourne. So if you try to visualize this person getting on a train, on a tram, or a bus, and if you don't overthink, and you just let your brain, this is highly likely that you will picture a passenger in a wheelchair. And definitely wheelchair users are part of people with disabilities who really need to move freely in the city. However, when we look at disability, it's a huge variety of needs that transport organization, health organization, and organization in general need to meet. Some are visible, some are invisible, some are temporary, some are not temporary. And just want to give some example, arthritis, heart disease, respiratory problems, mental illness, that unfortunately I think we will have more and more to deal with, nervous system disorder, autism, pregnancy, people being injured. And the point I'm trying to make is that the only way to really improve inclusion of all these needs is really to embrace a human-centered design, which is really putting ourselves into the shoes of the users, and they are diverse, and sometimes they have conflicting needs. I was giving the example the other day, when you add a pole in a train to help people with visual impairment, you create an obstacle for someone in a wheelchair. And therefore, engaging with people with disabilities, but also with, people from diverse backgrounds is really a must-have. And just to conclude on that, I would like to give you an example of bad design. The University of New York released a study a year ago where they look at artificial intelligence. And while technology is definitely a lever to increase diversity and inclusion, we've talked about, digital cities and different ways to engage with our cities, especially in a COVID time. However, when you look at artificial intelligence, this field is overwhelmingly male and white. And so if you look at data, 2.5% of Google workforce is Black, 10% of Google and 15% of Facebook AI researchers are female. And I think what's interesting is when you look at examples which are in this report, where unfortunately you come up with image recognition services making offensive classification of minorities. You've got apps failing to recognize users with darker skins. And it's not about judging researchers or developers about that, because we all design with our own bias, and we all have unconscious bias. And that's where human-centered design, by really looking at edge users, people with diverse needs, you can really design better solutions for people with disabilities, for diverse people, but actually for everyone.
You make some wonderful points there, Emily, and thank you for taking us through it. And I think you've introduced this idea of good design means going far beyond compliance and this human-centered approach. And I know we've spoken before, and it's in the paper every day, this issue that we've seen with the towers in Melbourne, for example. And in fact, this week, only this week in France, President Macron was speaking about how he wants to shake things up and reverse those sort of integration design errors that they've made historically, which have resulted in this ghettoization of public housing. So a really interesting situation to explore. But I'm actually going to go to June now, because I think it's the elephant in the room, but we really need to explore a little bit more COVID-19. And Miriam, you so nicely gave us that history and framework and purpose of cities and the role that big events have played in their development. And I think COVID-19 is another significant event in the evolution of our cities. And our new normal means we're engaging differently with them. And I guess, June, what I'd like to know from you is what does more working from home mean for our cities?
Yeah, thank you for that. And I really appreciate the point Miriam made about how cities came about, right? So I guess for me, in a nutshell, I think what we'll see pivot is more intentionality in terms of how people gather post-COVID. So it's about really, if you do go into the office, that you plan your day, that you ensure that you have your meeting set up, and that it's purposeful gathering, right? Because there are still constraints. I guess different cities, different countries are in different stages of emerging from COVID. I'm somewhat blessed to be in Singapore, right? Right now we have, we're in phase 2, as they call it. So you can gather. We're encouraged to work from home, generally speaking, but you are allowed to go into the office. And from a Schneider Electric perspective, the company has encouraged all our countries to enable a hybrid model, a hybrid approach to work, which means minimally 2 days a week you come back into the office, right? And I'm sort of living that, right? So as I go into the office, I make sure that it's very intentional, that we organize the meetings with our groups of colleagues. We plan lunch, right? So that we can go out and gather, right? So it's important. I think you can't I don't know, maybe I'm old school, but I don't think I can live in the virtual world 100%. I'll just go mad. So I think that human connection is necessary for us in the long run. And that's also where you get to brainstorm and discuss things and yeah, you know, and have a sense of bond, right? So coming back to your question around how that will impact cities, I think at least in the case of Singapore, what we've seen is the usage or the utilization is such that, you know, people go in, but not at the level of pre-COVID, right? So the government was very intentional, and I think this is one of the measures that has helped us curtail the number of cases erupting in Singapore. So there's a staggered time going into the office so that, you know, public commute is managed in such a way that you don't have the density at peak hours. But I think there's also the downside impact of that, right? So as people plan and manage the schedule, we're also finding that you know, those who opt to work from home no longer need to get in that frequently. That's impacting retail, right? The retail and the food scene. And I think earlier on when we caught up, I mentioned about, you know, bakeries and you know, household brands, right, that have been established, you know, chefs who have, you know, worked so hard to set up their restaurants and, you know, in the city center, really having to wrap up, sell off their business overnight, right? Because of the impact, the low traffic going in. So, yeah, so I think the other thing I want to mention, and I'm really proud of this, is, you know, besides sort of the hybrid model, which enables us to exercise flexibility, we're also very blessed to work for a company that really technically does not have a headquarter per se, right? So, and that gives you a sense of how our leaders lead and plan, right? You know, the Schneider footprint overall. Very proud of that. I think that, you know, our multi-hub strategy really enables us to hire the best people to do the job, right? And you know, from anywhere around the world. So I think that helps us to harness really diversity and inclusion in the sense that you don't have to be in XYZ country or city to have a global role. Take, for example, myself and my colleagues, we are helming international roles or global roles from Singapore, right? We don't have to relocate our family to another country just to be able to have a, you know, a fulfilling career, so to speak. So I think, you know, for me, that's a sign of, you know, how should I say, you know, leadership thinking that is way ahead of, I think, many organizations. Yeah. So, and being very intentional about that as well. So,
I'm just going to come back to that point about the city and this, and the lack of foot traffic, the lack of, I think they're anticipating, you know, a drop of around 1/3 in Melbourne, for example, Julien, as a result of COVID, even when the city reopens. And of course, it's been a huge week for Melbourne this week, and how appropriate for us to have this conversation around this timing. But Julien, can you talk to us a bit more about how do you revive the diversity and inclusiveness of a CBD in light of what's just happened?
That's certainly a big challenge, and I think we have been looking back a little bit in the history. So if I just look back at the history of Melbourne, you will remember that 30 years ago, Melbourne was called like you know, a donut city, where there was the suburbs were full of life. It was a very suburban city, and the city center was busy and active during the day and absolutely empty at night. So definitely not very diverse and not very inclusive as a city. And with COVID, there is a risk that this happens again, because we have been told now that, well, at least we haven't been told in the last month that it's not safe to travel, that we should stay at home as much as we can. And certainly we don't want to go back to the donut city. So this is why it's very important that we work to make the city attractive, diverse, and vibrant again. And so I think the key thing here is that we need to recreate the trust of everyone and restore the livability of the city. And so there is a range of actions, I think, that needs to be taken to revive this trust and livability. And the community here in Melbourne has been very active there. Providing on-street dining options, for instance, to make people feel safe, that it's easier to socially distance, adjusting the work hours in many offices. So June just mentioned the work from home, how important it is. But when you still need to go to the city, how do we make sure that not everyone is traveling exactly at the same hours, so that, for instance, public transport are not packed, and that there's enough space and distance for everyone. How we encourage cycling and biking, and for instance, again here in Melbourne, I think it's 30 or 40 kilometers of pop-up bike lanes that were built in just a couple of weeks. And I think all these small initiatives, each of them will not change a life, but when we combine all of them, that's how we rebuild that trust and this livability. And I think this is absolutely key in restoring that spirit of the city, which is accessible, diverse, inclusive, and needs to be again, because it was not during COVID.
Thanks, Julian. And June, have you seen any similar responses in Singapore?
Yeah, certainly. I think, even from the urban planning, I think for a long time now, the government has been very intentional in, we have a very small sort of piece of land, right? As they call us, we're the little red dot. So they've been fairly intentional in spreading out offices and development into the suburbs, right? What we call suburbs here. So over time, I think we've seen that plan actually helps because it distributes the population into different what I call township. Okay, so right now they're in the midst of developing Jurong, which is in the west, into a business center. So we've seen an acceleration of that because we clearly see that whole congregation into the central business district is not the best model from a congestion, pollution, pricing, retail pricing standpoint, real estate pricing standpoint, right? So there's been really a spread out, as well as really designing the township in such a way that you have basically, stadiums, sports centers, retail outlets, offices, whatnot, right? So that enables people to also have faster access to work, to whatever it is that they need, as well as regional, what we call hospitals as well, right? So healthcare, sports, retail, work areas. So I see us moving more and more in that direction. And so how do we purpose the use of our city center is probably something that the government needs to really think through, right? In terms of leveraging what is now available for the nation.
Yeah. And you touched earlier on the leadership attributes that you're starting to see within Schneider Electric and would hope to see in other organisations. Miriam, I might throw to you on that. What do you think we need to see in our leaders now if we're going to keep shaping a diverse and inclusive and attractive city, especially against a COVID-19 backdrop?
Yes, no, it's fascinating. I think that having the hybrid model of Singapore, of Schneider Electric, seems to be a really good way for the future. I do believe that young professionals need to have training by immersion. I felt very much fine when we were in lockdown working from home, as you can see my background, because I don't need to have somebody to ask questions from. But I felt very bad for all the young people starting in their careers who do not have the professional environment, who cannot copy, who cannot absorb by just being in the workforce. So they do need, the young professionals, to have this hub of professionalism around them. And how do you recreate that? I don't have a view. I was reading, but I like the Schneider Electric view. I think that's probably a very smart way of going about it, I will certainly talk about it. I was reading an old magazines, a French magazine, talking about the futures, the cities of the future, and they said there were two ways of approaching it: the mountain way and the ocean way. So the mountain way is when you have a strong government who decides and implements something from the top down, and will say, we'll do that, and we'll create public transport, and everybody will do that. And then the ocean world is where you have the local decision makers are listening to all their vested interest, and the local businesses and the local people, and it's a lot more difficult to then make the decision happen. But at the same time, it will happen, because if you don't make any change, there will be a congestion, there will be no possibility to go into the city, there will be no city to go to, whatever. So I just thought these two approaches, the mountain versus the ocean, are really a good way to describe things. I'm not sure I have a clear solution. I think that each country has their historical culture and way of doing things, but I like to copy what's doing well everywhere. So that's where I am always trying to find the smartest people in the room and go for what they are suggesting to do.
Some good advice there, Miriam. Thank you. Emily, any further thoughts to add around leadership in these times?
I think just reiterating how much important is the leadership component of embracing diversity and inclusion. A few stats: 45% of employee experience of inclusion is explained by their manager leadership behaviors. And in a COVID-19 world where you don't interact face-to-face, too much often, I think that's a leadership challenge for all of us. And I was also referring to the study I did a year ago, where the biggest barrier that was raised was the lack of role models. And I think that's in saying that, it's about having leaders who reflect the community that we all serve, and this is a diverse community. And the last point I would like to make, maybe it's a bit controversial, but I think in the context of the social, economical, environmental challenges that we are facing, I feel the need for a more, what I call, mindful and feminine style of leadership for all people, not only for women, by the way, for women and for men, removing ourselves from the traditional masculine qualities of leadership about being assertive, being powerful, etc., and moving to a more, heart-centered leadership is, I think, a big element.
Thanks, Emily. And Julien, I get the impression from the conversation with you earlier that you're making this shift too in the last year. Are there any further thoughts from you around being a leader in these times, and in particular how to make Melbourne, in your case, a more diverse and inclusive city?
So definitely the role of leadership is really important. We touched on the fact that the design of the city is absolutely central to the way it will make it more diverse and inclusive. And I believe that it is important that the leaders who help design the city and manage it and the services in the city are actually as diverse as the city are as well, because it will be how you can actually fight this unconscious bias that it can be, and make sure that the solutions that are being designed and implemented are actually best suited to the needs of everyone. So yes, how we leadership can have an impact, and what good leadership could look like is something that is really, really important, and it's good that we touched on that.
Thank you. Well, look, everyone, it's been a great discussion, and I've really enjoyed your insights. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise. And I really do encourage our viewers to continue to reflect on the diversity and inclusion facets of their cities, our cities, as we revive and continue to build them. I'd like to thank also for today my colleagues at the French-Australian Chamber of Commerce for their fine organisation of this event, and also a big thank you to the French Embassy, Austrade and our sponsors for their support throughout the business days. And finally, of course, a big thank you to our viewers. For those of you watching, I hope you enjoy the rest of the exciting program. And please join us at the end now for a live Q&A, which will run for about 15 minutes, where you'll get the opportunity to interact with our fabulous panelists. But once again, thank you to you all, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the exciting FACCI program focused on attractive cities. Thank you again.